All right, so now we move into chapter 22, Ideological Conflict and National Unification, 1815 to 1871. And we are going to expand our vocabulary. And as you know, one of the assignments that I'm going to have for you is to explain and articulate a kind of wide range of vocabulary. But I don't want you to just use textbook definitions. I kind of want you to explore the ideas that are about these, and you're going to incorporate what I'm going to be mentioning to you. And you might find some other definitions that kind of add some clarity. But I think, when I was reading this chapter, and I found this to be the case many times when even with philosophy dictionaries or other things, they still don't do justice to a lot of trying to understand these concepts, because when we get to the concept of ideologies, as we're going to see here, it's kind of like you get, let's just take, religion. So let's say we get 4 people who claim to be Christian, and you say define Christianity. Some will be very similar in what they say, and some will give a definition that the other one might say, well, that's not really what Christianity is. Oh, so what is really Christianity? And then the conflict as to what that actually means. What will be similar is that they all are centered around the topic of Christ, or focusing on Christ as the framework and for which to articulate their spirituality. But how they define that and how they live that, a Jehovah's Witness and a Catholic and a Baptist, they define their Christianity or idea of Christianity is very different. Again, but around one idea. This textbook doesn't clarify in the way that I would have liked, and I'm going to do that for you, that when it comes to terms, that some of the terms that are in here, you can't just say, oh, here's this term, here we've defined it, now you know what this term means, because it just so happens that there's several different ideas that people who claim those ideologies that you should at least be aware of, okay? First of all, we've already seen events of revolution and violence and reaction to the old world orders as something that keeps popping up, and those are going to affect a lot of people and how they on their thoughts about the past. Is the past a good thing, or is it a bad thing? What do we make of the present, and what are we going to see in the future, and where does the justification of violence come in a new world order? And we start off in this chapter, excuse me, I got a little bit of a cold, I think, the Paris Commune. The Paris Commune is only a few weeks that it lasts, but like the French Revolution, well, of course, being in France, it's influenced. Again, we see the influence of the French Revolution keep popping up even in this chapter. But here, the communards, not the communists, but an influence on the communists later on. But they create an alternative society, which many people see as a workers' state that gives all these rights, and it's crushed. But the idea of it, the inspiration behind it, is going to appeal to people. And again, it cracks open many of these debates that are going to take place, okay, as you read in the textbook. All right. So liberalism. When we talk about liberals here, and this is something that I wanted to say. All right. So you might be a person who is very political, and you may not be political. But if you should know, you watch Fox News, and it is a news organization that's focused on people who are consider themselves conservative. That's a base that they're appealing to. Like if you watch Fox News, absolutely, okay. Then you have CNN and Msnbc, those other mainstream media networks. They don't as straightforward, I think, overtly appeal to liberals, but they do. That's what they're appealing to. NPR on the radio appeals to kind of educated liberals, and AM radio definitely heavily gears Michael Savage. Oh gosh, there's more than that. Rush Limbaugh, of course, and a whole lot of other popular guys. Sean Hannity, who's on the radio and on Fox News. This is all call themselves conservatives, but when we're reading from this time period, don't get confused with the term liberals and liberalism that is used now and conservatism that's used now in the United States and what we're referring to in this particular part. Okay, I would say that this is the origin or the origination of these things, but you got to remember, I mean, think about things like this when it comes to terms. The Democratic Party in the United States was the slave party. If you were a slave owner in the South, you were a Democrat. And yet the Democratic Party is eventually going to see the first black president in the United States come to power as a Democrat. The Democratic Party today, the majority of African Americans are, in the Democratic Party. After the Civil War, the majority were in the Republican Party. The Republican Party now and the Democratic Party now, they're different parties. They've switched on so many levels, and yet you can see certain trends or things that have been a part of them, but you can't just use the term Democratic Republic, a Democratic Party and Republican Party in American history, and then know you're getting the same thing as you are later on. Okay, so again, the terms different, but the topics are the same. It's just the labels and what's under the umbrella of their definitions are going to change. Okay, and they're going to be a little bit more muddled. If you're not clear about what people consider to be a liberal or democratic now, or a conservative, well, I guess I'll just spend some time and just say that. Most people now, if you talk about a liberal, Democratic Party tends to get the label of being a liberal. And liberals tend to view more open to social issues like gay marriage. That's considered liberal. Also, they're more open to government programs, welfare, things of that nature. And big government isn't the big issue for liberals. In fact, they oftentimes think the government should intervene over race equality, let's say affirmative action, or again allowing gays to marry regardless of what even a majority thinks. Okay, so they believe in state intervention. What people consider themselves to be conservative now generally is a Republican Party, and they're conservative. They want to conserve moral values that they believe are more close to traditional. More traditionally, you could say, right? They want to preserve what they would call the sanctity of marriage, or what they mean as traditional view, man and woman, straightforward, right? Okay. On the same token, they don't want government intervening in most of these things. And so they don't want government, they're against gun laws, for example, because that's considered to restrict liberties. They're into individual liberties much more so. They want the state out of our lives. Let people not wear helmets when they ride a motorcycle. Let people not be forced to put on their seatbelts, and accept the consequences for their actions. Okay, take responsibility for those. Let churches and private groups take care of the poor and family members, and let people pull themselves up by the bootstraps and work and not rely on government intervention in their things. Those are kind of seen as things that are more a part of conservative values. But what you see, just like you'll see here, these are the kind of idealistic definitions. And sometimes you can get a Democrat that acts more of one way or the other. I mean, so for example, the Latino population in America, as religious Catholics, tend to, I'm just talking about a generalization of just like statistics and polls, tend to be morally conservative. In other words, the Catholic base, which is generally a part of the Latino population, tends to be in common, have a certain affinity for Republican parties, maybe moral or ethical positions that are associated with the Republican Party. But also a lot of Latinos coming up from Mexico, coming from out of a very struggling economic environment due to mismanagement of the government there and a lot of other policies that are beyond their control, see value in, they believe in hard work, but they also might need social services to help them out, and see that the Democrats are going to be more helpful and sympathetic towards helping out their families under their socioeconomic conditions. So right now, the Latinos kind of vote. I mean, I'm just mentioning things that I read and overlook. Okay, I'm not making my own value judgments on anybody, and I'm not trying to pin down to a stereotype. But what I am saying is that the Latino population kind of poses a conundrum for the Democrats and the Republicans, who are trying to pull them over onto their voting side, because they're not necessarily fitting into this ridiculously narrow kind of set of alternatives that we have in American politics. In places like Europe, you have Christian socialists, for example, that believe in, Christian morality, but they overtly believe in liberal economics and so on. We have a very kind of limited set. We have two parties. That's it, right? So I don't think I've wasted your time too much by going over this, because I feel like, especially for those of you who have not really been learning politics, I've just really explained well, I think, where we are at in current American politics. And there's that language that's used, liberals and conservatives, okay? And again, I want you to now think about what I'm going to define for you in contrast to where we're at now, and see maybe where they're similar. So the liberals of this time period are into protection of individual freedom. That sounds like something more that would be a part of the conservatives. But liberals would never say that. Now in American politics, everybody would say that they were into protection of individual freedom. They at least say it, okay? And they wanted equality before the law. That was something, okay, so a lot of the things that they're wanting at the time are things now that we associate with the normal Western civilized society that weren't a given back then, as we've seen, okay? So you have the idea that a rich person and a poor person would have equality before the law was something that they wanted. And, now technically we have equality before the law, but in actuality, you don't, right? Because a rich person can afford a great lawyer. A poor person often can't. A rich person can make wiser decisions on how to, dress or talk or present themselves. And they can have nice, powerful friends to kind of speak on their behalf. And a poor person may not. But in theory, we do have equality before the law. And that's something that they were also wanting. And I think they didn't have. And again, I think it was even closer to just theory as opposed to practice back then. Now, the right to vote. Even in this country, it's not until Andrew Jackson that a propertyless person, a man, the average man without property would have a right to vote. Now, you notice that liberals didn't want propertyless men, I'm talking about liberals and the right to vote. Because if you read in this chapter, they said, well, since they didn't have property, they wouldn't secure property rights, which is what liberals thought that was an inherent right, the right to property. Think about what a different view that is. And it shows that still in politics, here at the 19th century, is very elitist, openly elitist. Now, you'll hear on the AM radio, they talk about elites in Washington. You'll hear Democrats talking about Republican elites. It's a bad word to be an elite. I think back then, being elite, it's a little less like empire. So you're a little bit more okay with saying that. I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to return to this in the next lecture.